That will never work. You can't push yourself. Seriously? Don't. Oh my God, that's That's bad. You probably should find other hobbies. You ever learn how to stop? Stop. Be happy. You don't bother me. Do you really want to? And my third grade, give it up. Welcome to Horrible Writing, the rawest, most candid, in-your-face writing show on the interwebs because none of us have time to suck. Let's do this. Welcome to episode 36 of Horrible Writing. I'm Paul Sadie, and I'm your host, and with me this time around is Lorna Rose. We are going to do another in the series of author interviews. And I'm kind of excited about this one because I've got my questions scripted, but this conversation could go just about anywhere. Lorna's going to come on and we're going to talk about being a creative, being a writer, and also being a mother. Lorna, welcome to Horrible Writing.
Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
I'm really excited. You are the second Wenatchee area writer that I've had on this show. So, you know, whereas 2 months ago, the world may have never heard of Wenatchee, now it's going to become a popular place.
Yeah, we're taking it by storm.
It's going to be the new hotbed of author writing. It's going to be, maybe you guys could have some retreats out there or something.
Ooh, well, we have, actually.
Yeah. You guys actually have some good stuff out there. Folks, I've had the pleasure of meeting some of the folks out in the Wenatchee area through a conference that they used to have. So at points during this interview with Laura, you may hear me try to bribe her into launching their weekend-long thing that they used to do that Kay let me know was going to be kind of broken up this year. So I'm looking forward to that. I like going out there and meeting you all. It's a neat collective of people. So we're here. We're going to talk about a topic that so many of us can relate to, but this time we're going to keep it specific to motherhood. So, Lorna, first to ground us in the topic, I got to know, did you start your writing career after you were a mother, or did you start off as a full, energetic, free spirit?
A little of both, actually. I have been writing my whole life. Excuse me, I've had sort of this on-again, off-again relationship with writing. Paul, I think at one point I read or you said on a show that you won like this, young author award, like, when you were in like third grade or something.
Right.
And that was me too. And so I was really into it for a while, and then, life would get in the way, and then I get away from it, and then I come back to it, and, it's kind of this cycle. And I decided to stay home when I got pregnant with my son and had my son. And I was really surprised that I wanted to stay home. I'd been this career person my whole life. My whole adult life anyway. And I sort of had this image in my head of stay-at-home moms. During the day they bake and they watch TV and they wear sweatpants and they cry a lot. And I don't do any of those things except for cry a lot sometimes. But I wanted to be home with my son. At the time, my husband and I were just going to have the one, we were going to be one and done. And so I wanted to be with him. And so then I started writing again. I got serious about it, and I wrote a lot about motherhood, my experience being pregnant, the transition from career to staying at home. I wrote about that a fair amount. I wrote about having a baby kind of relatively late in life. Yeah, I mean, I was 35 when I had him. And yeah, I just started doing that and got more and more serious about my craft and got involved with Right on the River, which is this fabulous organization that we have here in Wenatchee that Paul was referencing before. And met other writers in the area, which was hugely helpful for me. It was invaluable. And finally got the confidence to call myself a writer.
That's always a hurdle, isn't it? It really is. It's not something to
Yeah.
easily to. I don't know what the cognitive barrier is to us, but yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because it's non-writers I think would take it for granted, but folks who are actually serious about pursuing this, it can be a significant barrier to get over.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Before I was like, "Oh, I'm a writer and I'm kind of in the closet about it." And, no, I don't make any money at it and, whatever and, all that. But yeah, I call myself a writer now. I think my craft has definitely improved because I have the confidence to call myself a writer, and commiserating with other writers has been hugely helpful for me.
Let's talk about some
Yeah.
of that stuff. I mean, you're a creative nonfiction writer. You're a poet. You've been recognized as a finalist by the Pacific Northwest Writers Association for a memoir that you're working on. I hope we get a chance to actually
Hmm.
talk about that. And you've got
Sure.
works published in a number of things. So, as we're talking about this pursuit, that one of the curious things I have to ask you, and it may be something a lot of the listeners will be able to identify with as parents themselves, or those listeners who aren't yet parents, something that may be weighing on their mind as they, you know, do that examination, that analysis. I really want to do this writing thing, but I really want, a baby. I can't have both type of mentality. So let's just have a frank conversation from your experience. What real life changes did you or did you go through, did you experience when you had your first child, relative to your writing pursuits and those writing efforts?
Interesting question. I'd say, well, like I mentioned, I got more serious about my craft and I started calling myself a writer. And I found a lot of material in motherhood to write about. I've written a fair amount of essays, like I said, about transitioning to staying at home and being an older mom. And my second pregnancy had some complications. And so that was inspiration actually for two poems that found themselves in some literary magazines. And so and for me, material has always led to more material, if that makes sense. I start writing about this one thing and then I'm like, oh yeah, that happened. That's worthy of exploring. And so I'd write about that. And like this memoir that I just finished up a first draft on, that actually has nothing to do with motherhood. That was a period in my life about 13 years ago, before I had even met my husband. So that sort of, like I said, the material leads to material type of thing.
Mhm.
That's kind of how I found this memoir inside of me and, the story that I was like burning to tell.
With I've got a question for you that I think you can expound on, that material leads to material theme, but I kind of want to save it for a second because I have a feeling I might be able to um may be able to explore it deeper if I save it for a little bit. So
Hmm.
if we could table that for a second, and I want to come back to it for listeners who are listening to you right now and they're really struggling with this and they're hearing you talk about with passion, which is great. Hearing you talk about how, material leads to material and you're doing all these other things post children. I imagine, like a lot of writers, you had to establish a routine or reestablish a routine to write. A lot of us have to have routines. So I guess it's kind of like a two-part question. One, do you need a routine to write? And then if so, what how did you do that? How did you do it from going, childless writer routine to wow, all of a sudden I'm a mom routine,
Hmm.
and keep being so productive with your writing?
Sure, sure, yeah. Well, I definitely have a routine to answer your first question. When I'm at home here, I do my a lot of my writing at night after the kids go down. My kids are just turned 5 and 2.5.
Oh, wow. So they're young then.
They are they are young. And they're usually in bed relatively early, and knock on wood, they go down pretty good. I say this now, and they're gonna hear the show, and then all of a sudden, not go to bed. But yeah, they're usually down by 8 o'clock, and I start. I establish this routine, Paul, and then after a while, I don't know if it's like your writing muscles or whatever. I mean, your body just starts to get that itch. It's like, okay, it's 8 o'clock. I gotta get down. I gotta get downstairs to the office. I gotta do my thing. Son, just go to sleep.
Hmm.
I need to work on my rewrites. Just go to sleep.
Oh, yeah.
So I do that a lot. I spend a couple hours at night after the kids go down. And that's when I get a fair amount of my writing done.
Were you always a nighttime writer?
Um, Before I just sort of wrote whenever the heck I wanted to,
Okay.
you
I,
know?
I ask because, I've got my routine and, from any of my accounts, social media accounts, I'll once in a while remember, because I often forget, but I'll remember to hashtag the 458 Club. It's kind of my little cute,
Mm,
cheeky reference to getting up at 4:58 because it's
mm.
psychological warfare on myself. I can feel pride and energized simply by getting up 2 minutes before 5, to kind of boast, hey, I got up before 5 to write today, kind of thing. But it's one of those little tricks that I use, to keep myself accountable and motivated to write. And I ask that of you because there is absolutely no way after a long day, especially with such young children, that I believe that I could have ever thought to sit down and write at 8 o'clock at night. I wouldn't have the
Sure.
mental energy. So
Yeah.
that's why I ask you, is because I'm trying to anticipate and hopefully we can help other writers who may be hearing you right now. I know some of these people in real life, these writers who would argue with you, Lorna, there's no way I'm sitting down at 8 o'clock at night to
Yeah.
write. Tell them how
You
they
know,
can.
yeah, it's just, I have heard a lot of writers that will get up early, including mom and dad writers. They'll get up before their kids get up. I just can't do it. I just can't get up that early. So, and I'm not necessarily like a night person, at all. But that's just, that's how I established my routine. When kids came, I'm gonna do this at night, as opposed to getting up
Mhm.
in the morning. My 2.5-year-old is still up at night. She wakes up at least once a night still,
Mm.
which is hard. But I don't know. It's just preference. I'd still rather be up at night writing, in the evening after they go down than getting up early.
No, I think maybe that's the key, right? Is regardless of necessarily your absolute preference. It's about it sounds like what I hear you saying is it's about really being disciplined about establishing the routine that works and can
Hmm.
work for you.
Definitely.
How
Yeah.
flexible did you have to be to establish that?
I'm sorry. What?
How flexible did you have to become, or how much were you willing to give up and give on in order to get that routine established?
Well, we're lucky in that our kids are pretty routine themselves. They both really like structure and routine, and we definitely have our bedtime routine going. So they fell into a routine, pretty early in their lives. And so when I started, like, for instance, writing my memoir, which I mentioned I just finished the first draft of, um, it was just this sort of, it was a big, big motivation for me. Like I said, I got to get downstairs and write.
Hmm.
You guys got to go to bed. I got to do this. And, so I don't know. It's just, I'm lucky maybe in that it just all just sort of fell into place. But I will admit I get pretty impatient when it doesn't
Oh, yeah.
go into place, and when the kids, they're up and they don't want to go to bed and they're like farting around or whatever. Because I just felt that drive, especially when I was working on my first draft. I got to get down and write. I got to do it.
No, I have to commend you. I can, as you were talking, I was nodding my head along because I can relate to it, which is maybe one of the reasons why I force myself to get up so early is to avoid a lot of that stuff because I don't think I could have dealt with it as well as you sound like you did.
Yeah, and I don't want to say I don't want to make it seem like I'm like totally rigid either. I'm
Right.
like some like Catholic whatever Catholic school teacher with the ruler. Like for instance, the other night my 2.5-year-old, I'm lucky in that she still loves to snuggle and she still likes to nurse and stuff, and so I'm in her room and we're going to bed and she's kind of snuggling. She's got her little head on my shoulder and she's kind of snuggling into the nape of my neck. And we're sitting there and her cheek's on my cheek and it's just a beautiful, beautiful moment.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to walk away from that. Absolutely not.
All
I mean,
right.
if she needs a few more minutes to settle down. I mean, she wants to cuddle for a few more minutes. That's great because you know what? Those moments they don't come back. I mean, you know that.
They don't. That is
They
true.
yeah. Once they're gone, they're gone.
Yeah. And it happens so fast. So
It
fast.
does. It does. I mean, my oldest just turned 5, and I can't believe it. I really cannot believe it.
Pretty soon they're going to be 17 and you're going to have to force them to hug you. So yeah, I don't blame you.
Exactly. I know. So so I don't take that for granted. I don't want it to seem like I'm I take motherhood for granted, or I'm taking I'm hurrying these special moments along so I can get down to my my office because I mean it's a balance for
Hmm.
sure.
Well, and I think that's it. And I'm glad you said that because I feel like that's the imperative message to take away. Without the balance, it's gonna cost us. It's gonna become unhealthy, right? Obviously, if something's not in balance. So, I mean, even if you did start sacrificing those things for writing, it, I would imagine you could easily fall out of love with writing because I mean that's a
Hmm.
significant cost to pay, to get your
Yeah.
word count in or whatever. Are you a word
Right.
count writer? Do you?
I'm
You're
not.
not? Okay.
No. No. No.
It's so
Not in
funny.
the
I am
least.
such a rigid word count writer, and everybody I interview does not do word count.
No, I don't. I had a good friend of mine who just started his book and he was asking me, about my word count and, how many words I like to get in per day and what my, chapter length is like. And I have no idea. I really don't. I mean, I'm more like a concept writer. Like, what do I want to tell the reader right now? What do I want to communicate to the reader? What story do I want to tell them right now? What scene do I want to set for them right now? And however long it takes me to get there or short. I mean, I'm kind of a um I don't know, editors are always like wanting more
Hmm.
from me instead of like the opposite where I have to trim. Usually it's more like they want more, they want like a longer piece.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it is a curious point for me, and it's whatever works for each one of us listeners. So what works for Lorna is great. What works for me is great. As long as we're sitting down at that keyboard and we're
Yeah.
doing it right, that's what counts most. But it is humorously interesting that I am such a word count aholic for myself. For my own, not that I'm not a prophet of word counts, folks. If they don't work for you, they don't work. But it's funny that everybody I'm interviewing, nobody does it. Okay, so
Oh, you're in the
I
minority.
am. So let's have a little bit of fun at your expense, Lorna.
Uh-oh.
What unanticipated challenges to your writing did these two wonderful gifts present for you? Maybe something recent, maybe right from the get go. It doesn't matter, but did something happen? Did it have an impact or an effect on your writing process, the actual end result of your writing that you didn't see coming in a million days?
Yes, there is. Actually, I was going to bring this up, and this speaks to what we were talking about earlier about material and kind of mining your life for material and stuff. Because I like you said, I'm a creative nonfiction writer and a poet. So unexpected surprise, definitely. I mentioned that we were just going to have one kid, me and my husband, and I got pregnant unexpectedly when our son was 18 months old. And so they're about 2.5 years apart. And I had some complications with my second pregnancy. I was told I did like a screening test to check for like genetic abnormalities and, whatever in the pregnancy when I was about 3 months along. And and I say she because by that time we knew it was going to be a girl. And she screened positive for a genetic abnormality. And that was really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, we did not know a whole lot. The like specific medical cases like that, they, in little old Wenatchee here, they sent us to Seattle
Mm-hmm.
for further testing and whatnot. And that was a really dark time for me because one of the markers in this thing that she tested positive for was a high rate of miscarriage. And so I didn't know if she was going to survive the pregnancy. I was what she screened positive for. I mean, you could miscarry at any time, throughout the pregnancy. And that was really hard. I wrote a lot through that journey, through that dark time. It actually inspired 2 poems of mine that, like I said, found their way into lit mags. Just kind of the projection of, losing a pregnancy. And then it sort of blossomed into losing a child, having a special needs child, just sort of all of that, sort of my glimpse into those worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And so for that, for those reasons, I don't take back that journey that I went on with her. My husband does. He wished I had never screened positive for anything, but I don't take it back. And it turns out it was a false positive.
Oh, okay.
And so she's great. She's healthy, and we had her tested at birth, and it was a false positive.
Wow. Okay.
The initial test. Yeah, it was pretty amazing.
That is. I can understand from both perspectives. I can understand you exploring and going through that journey, and I can also understand where your husband would come through too, because I can imagine the toll that had to have taken on you. How does that continue, maybe even to help you as a writer to explore your craft as a writer then?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think I think it makes my writing, and I believe that writing is a reflection of you and your human experience. It's made them both deeper and richer, and I guess that's another reason I don't take back that journey that I took with my daughter.
Do you feel like you and again, I mean, as always, if this is something you'd rather not talk about, I'm totally okay with that. No harm, no foul at all. You've got me thinking about this. As a writer, sometimes there significant things happen in our lives which allow us, if you will, to touch recesses of our mind, our cognitive emotional state that we wouldn't otherwise be able to reach.
Mm-hmm.
Can you relate to that? Is that something kind of what you went through in that journey then?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I sort of had this, especially when we first got that positive screening result. You just go through all these emotions, like all at once, emotions that I never even knew I had, because there was no reason to have them. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was such a new experience for me, sitting with this positive test result and facing the prospect that my daughter, if she survives the pregnancy, might have these medical needs. And so you do a lot of exploring. I think a lot of self-awareness comes out of experiences like those. And I mean, I've kind of become this proponent of, I really understand now what it's like for women to have a miscarriage and to lose a child,
Mhm.
and really, really, truly how painful that is, and really how e- easy it is. I don't want to freak any of your readers out that, or your listeners out that are, pregnant or plan to become pregnant, but
Right.
um, something like miscarriage and having problems and complications in the pregnancy. I think that's more common than people realize. The mainstream narrative, of course, you're pregnant and it's all great news, and then 9 months later you have a baby and it's totally healthy and no problems. And I think that's less common than what is portrayed in the movies and in
Mhm.
society.
Yeah. I mean, we do that in so many other forms, don't we? Where we avoid those uncomfortable topics, and we do
Hmm.
that maybe like a social contract coping mechanism almost. So, do you take risks that you wouldn't take otherwise in your writing, even now? Maybe now that this is 2.5 years in the or 3 years in the past, to still explore this, and if so, to explore this experience that you went through. And is there a community that you found or has found you through that you feel that maybe you've just discovered through this? Because I could see where you opening up like this through your skill and through your craft and through the creations that you put out there in the world is going to resonate with people. It's going to help people. So I'm curious if that's what you found through that, and it kind of like feeds back into you as a writer, so you keep sharing that, with either that community, or you've taken it broader to help others.
Yeah. Yeah. To answer your first question, I definitely take risks. I go to that uncomfortable place, or that's uncomfortable for a lot of people. And to speak to you more of your second question, I recently met this woman. She's a nurse here at the hospital, and she runs a support group for women who have had a stillbirth or have lost a child,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a fabulous support network that she heads. And she met me and realized who I was, and she said, I love your writing, and by the way, I use one of your poems. I read one of your poems in our when I open up the meeting. I guess they
Wow.
meet monthly or whatever, this grief group, and that was really nice. I
Mm-hmm.
had no idea that she did that, and that was really nice to hear that it's being used like that, because that
Yeah.
I think that was sort of the idea.
I mean, that's powerful to know that, each time she does a support group, whether it's a woman or, I know Wenatchee's small, but 100 women, to that they're hearing this message. And I imagine I'm completely shooting in the dark here, but I would imagine she's using it because it's an empowering message. As an artist, that's a very transcendent need that's being filled there, to know that one of your creations is being used for that purpose. That's powerful.
Yeah, it was very humbling.
Yeah.
It was.
That's
Yeah.
awesome though. I mean, one of the themes I will say about the show is, I always talk about empowerment through candor, having real conversations about real things that real
Mm,
writers are going through.
yeah,
And
I like
for
that.
something like that, I mean, it just gives me chills to think about, the difference. I mean, who we don't know. One woman may have heard that poem that one day, and it may have stopped her from self-harming or deliberately overdosing or something. We don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
really powerful thing to think
Yeah,
about.
I mean, just to know that, you're not the only one going through
Hmm.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is awesome. So, with your creations, so the more creative elements of what you do, I'm curious because I love my kids to death. I've got two daughters myself. They're absolutely headaches that I love dearly. Best headaches ever.
I can relate.
But they help us see. My experience has been that they help us see the world, um, sometimes in ways that we would have never seen otherwise. So for you, as however your process goes, outlining, or if you're just walking around with an idea in your head for a month or a year, have your
Mhm.
children, becoming a mother, have your children um, changed the way that you character build, story build, world build?
Um, hmm. I don't know. I don't know if they have, to be honest. I always I don't I mean, I'm not a fiction writer,
Mm-hmm.
so, the world building and the plot, and that's not really my wheelhouse, but, I think if anything, they've added some, more of if anything, a more of a human element to the essays that I write, and, um I don't know. Completing my first draft of my memoir, which is my first book length project,
Okay.
that I just wrapped up. I'm slogging through rewrites right now, um, and I'd like to think they've helped me find my voice
Yes.
as a writer.
How has that played out thematically for you then? I'm not strong. I'll read poetry at our weekly writers groups, and my feedback is always couched in, "Hey, I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm doing, but here's what my thoughts were on your poem." So, theme obviously is heavy, is important. So, how does that play out in theme then, or in the themes that you're developing?
Okay, so I've got two answers for you. Um, let's see. The first is I've always, you know, I don't. I'm kind of a like a I'd like to think of myself anyway as a very self-aware person, and I like to bestow that on my kids, and I like to talk about emotions with them and really kind of encourage emotional intelligence. And the other night, I was reading a book to my daughter. We're also big readers. Um, and anyway, I was reading this book to my daughter, and she points, and Elmo is frowning, and she says, Elmo looks sad. And I said, "Why is Elmo sad? Elmo wants his mommy." And it was really cute.
Mhm.
And so I think, how that translates to my writing is I like to be transparent about emotion in my writing. And like I mentioned before, I want to go places that make people uncomfortable and that will push the reader, because that's valuable to me.
Mhm.
I don't know if does that make
Oh
sense?
no, it totally does to me. I don't know if you're an audio drama fan or not, but one of my criticisms of audio drama, fictional podcasting, is there aren't a whole lot of people, and it's maybe because this rebirth of it, at least in the States, it's reborn. I know my UK based listeners will be like, "Hey, Paul, it's been around forever." I know. But one of my criticisms about this new generation of audio drama is that it doesn't take a whole lot of risk in that respect, Lorna, that it doesn't
Mm,
push the listener to be uncomfortable. I embrace that. So yeah, when you say things like that, it makes absolute sense to me.
okay. Yeah. Yeah. And even in my memoir, it's a time in my life, like I mentioned, it's 13 years ago I had this experience, but I use a fair amount of flashbacks that I weave in. And, I'm upfront about challenges that I had growing up,
Mm-hmm.
about, one point suicide ideation, and growing up with a learning disability and being bullied and having an abusive father. I mean, I get into all of that, and that's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Those are just uncomfortable topics. But you know what? I'm going to do it because I went through some of those things and I thought I was the only one.
Mm-hmm.
Just like when someone's experiencing a miscarriage or a tough pregnancy, they think they're the only one, because no, we readily don't talk about these things
Right.
because it is uncomfortable. But I want to talk about them.
No, yeah, and it's so powerful and it's so important to be doing too. And that on that note, then, what about? I'll do air quotes for you since we're on camera here. Listeners, I'm doing air quotes, I promise. But what about like a moral lesson that being a mother has taught you? I know for me, my kids have almost in a way sometimes been, a source of salvation for me because like you were talking about with your daughter there, having that emotional intelligence, but having that empathy, right? Something's wrong with Elmo. She
Mhm.
recognized it and she wanted to explore that. A lot of us, as we get older, we become jaded. It's exhausting to be a human being in the world sometimes, because of
Yes.
the world. One of the things that my kids have done for me, especially my youngest daughter, has reminded me empathy, empathy, empathy. Always be empathetic first, right? So for
Mhm.
you, on a moral level, if you will,
Mm.
what kinds of moral lessons have you really been able to anchor on as a mother?
Oh my gosh, that's a big question.
Yeah, it is, and I did not prepare her, listeners. So,
Uh, again, two answers for you. The first is I look at my own childhood and I look at what really worked for me and what really made me thrive and what I enjoyed. Even just a tiny moment of, being with my dad for something, or my I have three brothers, three brothers. And my oldest and I grew up 18 months apart, and playing tree fort with him or something.
Mhm,
Moments that really worked for me, and then stuff that didn't, as that, that my parents kind of bestowed on me, that really kind of hindered me. And I look at all of that and I think, okay, what works and what doesn't? What can what kind of person am I, and what kind of mom do I want to be?
mhm.
And that's what I strive for every day. And I'm not perfect by any means. I've definitely lost it on my kids, but I look at where I am and where I want to be, and it's a
Mhm.
constant you know like sort of self improvement exercise that I
Right.
do.
Yeah, it's a work in progress for sure, a perpetual work in project or
Hmm.
progress. It doesn't stop
Hmm.
when they leave the house either. So I mean,
Yeah. So I've got a long road.
yes, when I say
Yeah.
perpetual, I really mean it is perpetual. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, but I think that's a great reminder, and it's looking for those lessons that looking for those lessons in life, I guess, is what I would say. When they're there to even remind us, even maybe even passively about those things like that. So what I would like to do at this point, because you have shared so much of your personal journey about motherhood and being a mother, and opening up about that experience that you had with your daughter, is I would like to be a good host, and I would like to be a good host and ask you one really big question. Now, listeners, if you're brand new to the show, you may not know what this is all about. So let me explain this. I'm going to ask Lorna for a horrible writing experience, and you may not know what that is. Each time I have an author, a writer, an audio dramatist, a poet on the show, I ask them for a horrible writing experience, something that happened to them in their writing journey that may have been horrible, may have been traumatizing and they've recovered from, may have been incredibly embarrassing, humiliating, and they're able to laugh at it all these years later. But ultimately, something they overcame, they lived through, they grew from, and they've continued on creating their craft for the world to enjoy. So, with that being said, Lorna, what is your horrible writing experience?
That's a great question, by the way. I really like that you ask your people that.
Thank you.
So I was thinking and thinking about this after you emailed and said, by the way, we do this segment at the end of the show. And I said, well, what do I want to talk about? And then it came to me one morning. I was like laying in bed and I'm like, oh yeah, this was fun. It's funny now. It was about 2 years ago this happened. Um, and yeah, so I had, enough material, and I had written enough, like, essays and poems and shorter pieces that I was at that point where I wanted to start submitting to Lit Max. and I knew next to nothing about submitting.
Mhm.
And I didn't know about like Duotrope or Submission Grinder or any other of those submission management tools that are out there. I didn't know about those yet. All I knew was I wanted to start submitting my work and hopefully getting some acceptances for publication. And somehow I ran across a lit mag called Tahoma Literary Review. And I believe they're out of Mercer Island. They're somewhere in Washington State. And I thought, oh, they're in Washington. I'm in Washington. I'm a writer. They must know me. And I had no reason to think this. I just thought that they knew me. And so, like I was like the only writer in Washington and they were just waiting for my work. And so I submitted 2 poems to them. One and they were both very early versions of poems that I had no business submitting.
Right.
One, the second poem ended up finding a home after many, many revisions. And it wasn't in Tahoma Literary Review, it was another journal. But the first poem was bad. The first poem was just not good. And I like I said, I had no business submitting even that one. And so I got a rejection a few months later and whatever. And then I discovered Duotrope a little bit later. And then I looked up their acceptance rate and stuff, and they have a really tiny acceptance rate for poetry. And I was like, oh, so I guess they don't know me, and they really, my poems need to be really, really good to submit to them and to get an acceptance. And so that was my first foray into submitting my stuff.
But the lesson here is, listeners, if you're still at the early stages in your writing journey, I want you to take away what she, I'm so glad that you shared that, Lorna, that you are so open about sharing that you just, willy-nilly, I'm ready to go do this, maybe well before you should have. And the important thing being you took away that lesson from it, that hey, I need to make sure that I'm prepared, and that the work that I'm submitting is at the quality that it needs to be before I just start throwing these things out there. But
Totally.
it didn't discourage you from continuing to not only develop yourself and your craft, but even those works that you had submitted. I know a lot of people, myself included, that have early work that I have thrown out there to the world well before it was ready. And it's one of those things I never went and revisited because I don't want to relive that. So, I admire that because I don't necessarily know that I could have gone back and looked at my early work that wasn't ready that I already put out there, and invested that time. I think I would have just thrown the towel and started on something new. It's another good lesson, folks, to one, make sure that you're sure on what your the criteria are and what you're submitting, and to that spirit of not giving up, of never giving up, even if you do something silly. And Lorna, I thought that was just so awesome. You talked about, surely they must know me. They're in Washington.
Totally. Yeah. 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 But you know what? I went on. I learned from that experience and went on and got acceptances elsewhere. And you touched on a question, and I don't know if you meant to or not. Is how do you know a piece is ready?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a very intuitive person. I follow my instincts a lot, and for me, I just know. I just know when something's ready. I know when something's not ready. I know when something's almost ready and maybe they'll accept it. And I've had rewrites requests and stuff from editors, and that's fine. But yeah, I just, I'm a big believer in following your gut.
Well, and I think that comes from probably, I would imagine, well, and you've already indicated it with your children that you sit down and you all read. But I would imagine that also comes from not necessarily being a voracious reader, but you probably read a lot. So even subconsciously,
Hmm.
your intuition's pinging on that hey, this is where it needs to be, or almost where it needs to be. And I say that to you, listener, because I know there's somebody listening to this right now who is going to edit themselves into inertia, and they're never going to move forward with anything, and or like Lorna, and take the chance to actually, aggressively or somewhat aggressively submit things to folks. And I'll try to discourage that until I breathe my last breath, because I know a lot of writers who do that, and that's why I love these horrible writing stories, because you've got folks like Lorna who can come on and share this, but also share everything that's come after this. What comes with not quitting. That's the only time we fail as writers, is when we quit.
Hmm. Hmm.
So let's talk about some of that stuff then, Lorna. What types of stuff would you like to share with the audience? Past works that you've got out there, or maybe, I don't know if I put you on the spot here, but maybe you could actually give us some information about this memoir.
Sure. I don't want to say too much about my memoir, but like I said, I just completed a first draft and I'm slogging through rewrites right now. I actually tweeted the other day that I ran away and joined the circus to avoid rewrites. Because they're just a different animal, I mean, they're
Oh
just
yeah.
not. It's just they're just different, I don't know. But yeah, so anyway, so I'm doing that. I was very honored to be a finalist at PNWA last year, for this memoir. And yeah, it's about, I went and did about 13 years ago, I served on a trail crew in Alaska.
Oh, cool.
And I had never done anything remotely like that. I lived in Southern California. I was a party girl. I was in Hollywood at the clubs every weekend. I kind of had this fantasy life of, I was this actress model and I was hounded by the paparazzi, and I was a little bit starstruck, and I had never camped in my life. I had never even seen a tent other than like in commercials and stuff. And I'd never certainly done manual labor or lived without showering or the internet or anything like that. But this opportunity just called to me. It was like a done deal. Like it was just fate that I was going to go do this. And so I did. And I had a lot of adventures, and also because I didn't know what I didn't know. I mean, I had a lot of misadventures, and I was on a cruise. So I wasn't totally by myself, and they were great. They were awesome. They were very patient with me because I really did not know a thing.
I can imagine what that must have been like.
Yeah. And I had a fair amount of demons when I went up there, and it really, when you're alone in your tent at night and you've got no
Mm-hmm.
other distractions,
Oh yeah.
you really can work through a lot of stuff and you really get to know yourself.
Oh yeah. Oh, I can. Yeah. One of the reasons why I love, absolutely love living out in Washington is because we take advantage of the camping season as much as possible, and it is such a cleanse, a mental cleanse. I love it. So I can imagine somebody from your experience or from that perspective, the LA scene all the way to something like that. I can imagine
Yeah.
you were doing some serious processing.
I
And
was. I was, and it was transformative for me. I mean, I came back a completely different person. And for years, I mean, I struggled for years after that
oh yeah.
experience to kind of shift. I mean, my whole world shifted.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you did a complete 180, and
I did. I
yeah.
really did. Some friendships fell away and
Mhm.
some friendships got stronger. And I don't think I would have met my husband or been interested in my husband if I had not done this.
Right. Yeah. So this is, I mean, we're gonna limit what we're talking about. So all of this journey, this entire transformative process journey is going to be the memoir. Then, so we're going to start out with
Yes.
you in L.A. and go through the. Oh, this is interesting.
Yeah, I hope so. And I do a fair amount of flashbacks, like I was saying, to my childhood
Hmm.
and to college. And I really want to give the reader a sense of where I came from, and then what I'm wrestling with, and then where I'm going, and yeah,
So what
yeah.
about some of your other works? Are you putting? I know you've got poetry out there and you've got some other
Hmm.
nonfiction works. Do you have anything maybe like a collection that you're working on? I don't even know if that's in your in your viewfinder yet or not, but
Yeah, not yet. I mean, I like you said, I've had some shorter works and some poems that are out there, and most of those are centered around motherhood, and there's a and social justice, and sort of privilege that a lot of us have in life. I think a lot about social issues and what's going on with the world today, and so my some of my writing is reflective of that. Um, yeah.
okay. So now that everybody's had a chance to hear you speak on this topic, and now that they're in love with you and they're going to want to go out there and chase you down on the
No, of
interwebs,
course.
where do you want to send everybody to out on social media so that they can find you?
Okay, so I've got a website, and then I've got a Facebook page, and I'm also on Twitter. If you would like to follow my feed, I would be honored. You can find me on Facebook at it's Lorna Rose, comma writer. It's my writer page, and it's Lorna and then Rose like the flower. And let's see, yeah, like I said, I'm on Twitter, and then my website is just lornarose.com.
And
And my publications are there. There's a little bio.
I will, and listeners, I will make sure that I link to all of these because Lorna does have them off the website, but in the show notes, you will also have these contacts as well. So,
Awesome. Thank you.
Lorna, I really want to thank you for this. I mean, this is an important thing. Like you said, we've got this idea of what motherhood will be, especially first-time mothers, and when somebody looks at the arts and they see their experience represented, and it's always healthy and happy and just full of love and joy and no troubles, it can be
Hmm.
a really dissociative type of experience if that's not how it goes for them. So what you're doing and what you're putting out into the world is very good stuff. So I'm very, very honored that you came on and talked about that.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. And if I could just add one more
Yes.
thing, you touched on like new mothers and how, what a big task it is. And I just want to reiterate that it is daunting being a new mom, young or old. I mentioned I was 35 when I had my son, which for my peers, that's a little bit older, than other
Mhm.
first time moms that I know. And it's just an overwhelming experience. I didn't bond with my son till he was like 3 months old. I just did not feel a connection. And I was like, everybody talks about how great motherhood is. What's so great about it?
Mhm.
You know? And so that's okay though. That's okay. I don't want to get into like postpartum depression because that's another animal, but it's out there, it exists. And it's just it's overwhelming, and you need all the support that you can get. I remember like getting out to put the trash by the curb was a huge accomplishment for me with a newborn. And I remember being so proud of myself when I did it.
Hmm.
And because that's how it is, you just, it is an accomplishment to get out of the house sometimes, even if it's just, in your yard or whatever,
Right.
and just take it as a win, and know that it gets better and it gets easier.
That's an awesome. I love leaving segments or episodes on sentiments like that. Again, listeners, that empowerment through candor. It's a wonderful gift to share. And Lorna, you've done that for us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This has been Horrible Writing, and hopefully after this episode, you suck less than you did at the beginning. I am Paul Sadin, your host extraordinaire. You can find me over on the Twitterverse at Writing Horrible. and over at paulsading.com/horrible-writing. Until next time, suck less.